was kind of a reinforcement of that. That as we accidentally started, getting into the more sophisticated adventures, we realized, no, we should just embrace this. We should embrace the fact that there's not a lot that's keeping you from this world. It's you and this world here, and we probably should keep things off the screen, that like an extra inventory or an extra border around the screen, or pop-ups, or anything that indicate. We want to make those all go away, so there is nothing keeping you from feeling like it's just you and the world. And so the further we got down that path, the more we realized that was kind of our angle, and we liked that. We embraced it, and I think it became one of those defining moments as we started really getting into Myst, and then Riven later as well. And just FYI, we feel like that's the same message we want in Obduction. We want it to be more sophisticated in the fact that we're using real-time 3D, but we would love to make it, the interface and the feeling of that interface, just kind of fade to the background. We want it to feel intuitive and natural, so that you're not having to learn complicated things necessarily just to explore the environment. So we're embracing it for Obduction as well.
Question for the community as well. Martin is asking if there are any notable games that you've played recently that influenced you enough that you think about using certain elements of it, or a feel or ideas when developing Obduction, or any future games you will be. Did you have any notable gaming experiences lately?
Yeah, well, boy, it's a tough question, because it's more general. Just for example, and I'll bring up Dear Esther again. By the way, Dear Esther is not one of my favorite games. I mean, I love what they did there, and it felt like they pushed things in interesting areas, but I think my response to Dear Esther is similar to what other people said, which is, wow, this is really beautiful and really cool looking, but I'm not sure what the game is. And I think that's what the developers wanted. They weren't sure what the game was either. They just decided to take all the interface out. You just move and you don't really click on anything. But the beauty of that world, without the threat of, I think we'd seen beautiful worlds in some first-person shooters before, but when you put that in just a non-threatening environment where you can just wander around, it was inspiring for us as we were starting to think about doing a first-person real-time game. That definitely was somewhat inspirational. I'm trying to think of others that were interesting. I mean, I'll tell you another very abstract inspiration is Jonathan Blow with The Witness. It's interesting watching his tweets, because he tweets about how many puzzles he's put in, and I'm up to this many puzzles, and talks about that a lot of times. And I think from his point of view, from the development of The Witness, and by the way, I haven't played it. I had a chance to play early version, and I turned it down. It's like, no, I want to play when it's done. I want to experience the whole thing. But I think his, as I mentioned earlier, you can concentrate on any aspect of things you want, and I think he really loves the puzzle aspect, and he's focused on that. And that, in some ways, I think I've heard that, in a very loose way, Myst inspired him to do The Witness, or at least parts of it, and so the interesting turn on that is that his focus on puzzles in some ways puts in the back of my mind, don't be afraid of those. They're good. Embrace the puzzles again. They don't have to be. You don't have to leave those out. There's room for those again. So in a real abstract way, it's like we may have influenced him, and he's back, and what he says influences us in kind of I think, very cool way that it should work. I mean, as generations, as we have these different game makers making things, it's nice to see things coming back around, and younger people even giving us old guys, keeping us fresh to a certain extent.
Cool. Speaking of puzzles, what would you say your favorite and least favorite puzzle from the original Myst would be? And,
Oh
I,
boy.
then I'll tell you mine after that.
Okay. So it's actually probably it's the same puzzle. Um, I I'll upset a lot of people with this because the most hated puzzle I think in Myst was the maze runner, the little car that you run through the little maze in the bottom of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
cell.
that's my least favorite. That was
So
one where I was playing it, going, "Oh man, like, no, they can't be serious. Like, no. Why would it be this difficult? I mean, what are they doing? I
exact
mean, just give us."
exactly. See, you fell into the trap. You fell into our
Yeah.
trap. But I have to say that that puzzle. I'm not saying we implemented it perfectly, but that puzzle also is one of my favorites, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you what we did wrong and why it's both my probably my least favorite and my most favorite. I think that we set ourselves up for that puzzle so that it was perfect in my mind. So the idea that you get to this age um, by solving sound puzzles. I mean, the whole organ in the spaceship thing. You got to solve the sound puzzles to get there. That here you on the surface of this weird cratered planet, and every puzzle here has to do with sound and what things sound like and getting the right sound and then getting through that door to go down into the maze has to do with putting those sounds right. And you go down in there, you get in this ship, and you sit down in front of this ship, and you go down into the maze, and the first thing you do, most people do, is forget about sound. They forget that everything they've done up to this point and everything to do with this age has to do with sound. They forgot about that. And
That's exactly
now,
right. Yeah.
if they had remembered that, the maze specifically the Maze Runner maze was designed specifically so that it reinforced the sound. There was no way to confuse the sound. It was built to teach you the sounds if you remembered that fact.
That's right.
In other words, if the first
But it's not all our fault.
no, it's not. I'll tell you what we did wrong in a second, but I'm telling you the reason I like it, then I'll tell you the reason why we screwed it up. You get to the first hub, and you hear, ding, you hear one sound. Well, that sound you hear is the only way you can go. So on your little notepad, you go, oh, ding means, and I think it was north, I don't remember. So right away, you have one sound, and you have that direction. And it just so happens that the second hub you get a sound, and there's only one direction you can go. So we've given you two directions and two sounds that you can't mess up. And from there, it gets
I've actually
little... Go
I've actually
ahead.
got my notebook here, and so yeah, so north is I've written down as ping, west as cheep, chirp, like a bird sound,
Awesome.
east east as a spring, like a doing sort of sound, and south as a cowbell.
I love
So
it. I love it.
and so like and if you can see like just scribblings of north,
That
west,
is
west.
awesome. So see, you did it, and I mean the maze I designed it so it would reinforce that, and it got more and more complicated. So that by the time you got to the end, we were throwing two sounds at once at you, and that got
That's right. Yeah,
very.
that's where it got confusing because it's like, yeah,
That's where it
that's
got
right. Then
confusing.
northeast, north, yeah, southeast, yeah.
And I think
Crazy.
I think the sounds themselves is where we messed up that puzzle because we made the sounds. Here's where we screwed up. We made the sounds subtle, where they should have been just blatant. I mean, that wasn't part of the puzzle to try and listen carefully, saying, "Wait, was that a sound?" It should have been much more clear. We could have made them a little louder so that it was like, "Oh, yeah, got it." But depending on people's speakers and how they were listening, it ended up being hard, and you weren't sure if it was the actual ship just stopping or what it was. And I think we definitely could have made things a little bit better as far as making the
Yeah,
sounds
because
more clear. But I do like
you
the
get lost
intent
on
of
that
that
maze. It's
puzzle.
all over.
Yeah, yeah. And so I feel people's pain who did not get that it was sound, and they did it like a mouse and just always went right and tried to map the thing by hand. And I feel their pain, and I'm very sorry for that. hopefully we both learned from our mistakes.
Yes, we did. My favorite puzzle is obviously getting actually to that part is using all the various sounds on the island and solving that puzzle of the wind, the volcano, and all those various sounds. That must have been a pretty new thing because I guess 1993, early 90s. I mean, the PCs were kind of behind other consoles and things like in terms of like sound because like sound cards and things like that didn't really come into fashion until the CD almost.
Right.
So what was so how did you like work with the like obviously like the Sound Blaster and all that sort of like low end sort of sounds? Was that any sort of difficulty, and especially like tying that into the music and stuff like that?
We were just on the edge of the sound stuff, so much so that we're on the trailing edge so that we could require it with the game. So, on the boxes it always had like now it has the system requirements, and we just had sound card. You had to have a sound card. We were doing it on the Mac, which was I think it had mostly had sound built in on that. So a lot of stuff we weren't sure about, but it was one of the things that we had to check on before we translated to PC. It's like, okay, yeah, we can depend on the sound. So, side note here is, for years we have toyed with the idea of microphone-related puzzles. We've always wanted to do microphone-related puzzles, but the same thing messes us up. It's not all computers have microphones in them. In one of our earliest games, Spelunks, we had these puppets in it that if you had sound input, the puppets would mimic, their mouths would move based on the amplitude of the sound, and it was just kind of a surprise if you happen to have a sound card hooked up that the puppets would start moving their mouths to mimic you. But it always seemed fun to us if we could rely on computers having a microphone and we could get that. There would be no reason why we couldn't use sound input as well as a puzzle. It's just even these days, it's much less definite that you're going to have a microphone.